the Cubans are to us, to have allowed us young black South Africans to be actually exposed to such a great model, that one day it will actually benefit South Africa. Because when we looked at it at the time, our training, it wasn't because we wanted to actually address some issues when we went there. We just got an opportunity. But now we needed to convert that opportunity and make it an opportunity once again for our country, and responding directly to our people in the country. Because we owe them that. They use their taxpayers' money to finance our training, and then what we need to do is to respond to their call, to say, we've trained you, now come back and plow back to the community and make sure that you give necessary management practices that you've lacked to address some of the health issues.
What do you think the differences are between someone like you who's trained outside of the country, particularly in the Cuban model, and the guys, girls back at home who've trained in, say, Walter Sisulu University, which has a Cuban style of curriculum?
Well, something that I think is critical that we need to understand is there's this one word that is called exposure, which is critical. South Africans tend to stay at home and they don't want to know what is happening outside of South Africa. Mm-hmm. Now we've had an opportunity to go outside. Now when we're outside, we're looking at South Africa from a distance. Now we are able to compare, because now we are actually experiencing both systems, and then we are in a better situation to actually understand the critical things that we need to address in South Africa, looking and comparing with the Cuban system. That is very critical because it's exposure that is relevant to the training of any individual per se. But we have an advantage of primary health care that is experienced at the first hand.
Which, even with the best teaching in Walter Sisulu, using a Cuban approach with community exposure, you're being exposed to the South African system
once again. Okay. Because now, in Walter Sisulu, what they have is they have the whole system. But is there anybody recognizing what they're doing? Is there enough publicity of what they're doing? Are we giving value to what are they doing? Have we done any studies and published it and adopted it in our country? We mentioned something very critical. Why are we continuing training students in Cuba when our universities think that they can do a better job?
Precisely.
Huh?
Yeah.
No, because if they can do a better job, then put people in and let's increase those numbers that we need and stop sending people to Cuba. But if we do have a different agenda, to say, no, we're actually looking at it in another way, to say, in Cuba, they've got this particular model that we're interested in. Let's send cadres that are going to pick up that and modify it to suit our own environment. Now we're looking at it in a different way. Right now, there's a lot of talk from university to university. People want to think about how possible it is to decentralize the level of training into community-based training. Just like all the universities are trying to do. Why all of a sudden there's this sort of like agency in terms of why do they want to do that? It's because the world is changing from the curative model into a preventative and a promotion of health, and they want to form part of that movement, you know. And then now they're starting to realize, no, maybe we are not doing things right. But now we've got thousands of students that are in Cuba. Let's utilize them effectively, and let's not frustrate them.
So what are the plans for the 1,000 students that are going to start coming back from 2017?
That's another mistake that we've done. We've sent students without a framework and a plan to say, we're sending you there because you want to come back to this system that we have already created. Because, I mean, if you are making such a great, enthusiastic move to say that I'm sending thousands instead of 40 to Cuba, then you should have a very good plan in place for you to be able to make it easy for you to absorb. But it seems as if we're still figuring out. We're still chatting with the universities.
If you were in charge of the plan for the returning Cuban doctors in 2017, what would be the principles or the ideas you'd like to see happen in that plan?
I think basically I would like the universities to be involved more. If at all we want to bring the Cuban trained student from 50 year to come back here and finish the final year, because that's another thing. We don't come here as fully qualified doctors. We come here to finish medicine in South Africa. But remember, that is very tricky because HPCSA, yes, which is the Health Council, right? They are in charge of who's supposed to be or who's allowed to work in this country and who's not. So if you don't pass the exams, you're not gonna get in. Now, if you qualify in Cuba and you're coming back and you're not passing the exam, what's gonna happen to you? You're gonna stay at home until you pass it. And then it's a waste of you sitting at home, not working and everything. Like it's happening in the other students that are actually working, that have trained in the other countries like China.
Okay.
Now, what I would like to see happening is, I want us to actually look at the Cuban experience as a motivation to say that we can do better. Let's take these students that are coming back and incorporate them. The critical thing is integration. I would like to see more of that. Integrate them in the system and have the universities that are fully accepting them and nurture them as their own. And reduce stigma. And stop, criticizing. You can want to help people just because they are lacking in a particular field, but without putting much stigma on them. And that is critical, because with young people with low self-confidence, and you start doing that, you're crashing their IQ.
So that nurturing, what would that include? What sort of specific things would you like to see in a nurturing package?
Nurturing package, I want to see basically mentoring in terms of the clinical aspects of our own South African training. With no doubt, Cuban system is different, as well as the what we call the profile of diseases. South Africa has another profile of diseases,
Sure.
but we need to be incorporated in that, and not looked as people that do not know, but rather looked at as people that were so unfortunate to be trained in a country that didn't have that, because they've trimmed those problems. So then we need to be incorporated and saying, okay, you don't know this, let's do 1, 2, and 3, let's create these projects that are going to enable you to be proficient in this particular field. Just like we do yearly, they do ATLS and ACLS so that people can be efficient in emergency medicine. Why can't you do that to me?
Correct. Yeah. Just looking back on your experiences overall, were there things that you think could have been improved in the Cuban time that you spent?
I think, to me, my worry has always been the lack of motivation from the government per se, in terms of motivating us and giving us the real reason why we were sent to Cuba. Because when we go to Cuba, we're young. And
17 in your case.
and we're very young, and almost we don't know a lot of things, and we need to be nurtured. We need to be directed in a way that is going to actually benefit our country. So if you don't have that nurturing during your course of training, you can be lost.
But be nurtured by the South African system.
South African system.
Possibly by somebody from the medical school you
from
go
the
back
medical
to
school.
finish.
Yes, definitely. Because at the end of the day, you don't choose which medical school you go to anymore. Because some people will say, no, it's difficult in UCT or in Stellenbosch or in West, so I want to go to Medunsa. Because there's a theory that it's better to go to some institutions than going to others. So that's also another thing. We need uniformity amongst the universities. We need to know that everybody is on board, thinking about the same issues, and they're actually prepared to take in students in a same sort of like basis and a background.
Yeah.
To say, you're coming here, this is the program, and everybody is going to be using the same program, and they stick to it.
Yeah, and it seemed logical for people to know which medical school they were going to go to for their final year.
For their final year.
They could know that certainly a few years in
advance.
Yeah.
So if we can start doing that and making, you're going to be going to UCT, you know how UCT is, you're going to be, be influenced by this type of people who've done these researches and all this, or in Stellenbosch, and then you become more interested into things. And you are driven into sort of like understanding more than what you're actually doing in class. Because basically medicine is not about everything in class. It's more about what is happening outside you. But because that's what makes you a good doctor.
And tell me about, what was it like trying to keep in touch with family, friends in South Africa when you were in Cuba? Because I've just been, and the internet's not great, telephones are expensive.
At least maybe you went there just like a few years ago. When we went there in 2002, it was even harder to get internet, and I remember that the first time I heard about Facebook was when I came back home. So because you couldn't possibly get a chance to actually go into the computer lab and access like a complete internet. Maybe intranet you could have,
yes.
But the full internet in terms of reading what is happening in your country, because it's important to keep on updating yourself with what is happening in your country.
So how did you do that?
So what we did is we used to pop up from our pocket and go outside to the Cuban houses, and then get people that are very much connected and ask, can't we do this? We want to access some information. Can't you help us do that? And we had a lot of friends. They say it's survival of the fittest. So you need to look at who are the people that you want to have relationship with in order to get what you want. So you know which people you want to be friends with so that you can benefit. So we had the same style.
Very good. Thank you very much. That's very interesting and
Thank you.
informative.
Thank you.